Thank you for joining us. I'm Chase Hurley with Water and Land Solutions. I'm based out of Los Banos. I'm going to be your quasi-moderator today. I'm sure I'll have some stuff to add and I'll feel free to answer any questions. But really what I want to do is being able to introduce you to our three speakers. We've got three really good experts in the water resource field. And how I want this to flow is it always does better if we get a lot of good questions. So feel free as we go to raise your hand. We'll answer your questions, and that may give us some initiative about what the next topic wants to be. We're here to help answer questions and educate you folks. We don't want to be up here speaking and not get any interplay. So feel free as we go through this to raise your hand, and we'll answer your questions as they come. Again, my name is Chase. I've been in the water resource field for 32 years. 75% of that time was with I spent in policy and advocacy for the Central Valley Project, contractors out in the Oro Loma Fireball area. After that, I was the general manager for San Luis Canal Company, a historical diverter off the San Joaquin River. And so most of the focus, probably 95% of it during that time, was on surface water supplies from Shasta all the way down to Kettleman City on the federal project. And then in 2018, I decided I want to get out and do some things on my own and started my own consulting business. I do a few other things as well. But now my firm, based out of Los Banos, we have 8 or 9 employees. We have work everywhere from Visalia all the way up into Orland. A lot of work with individual farmers on resource issues. We do a lot of construction projects, getting guys hooked into facilities so they can get some surface water moved around the area. And then we manage around 10 small water districts or mutual water companies that don't need a full-time general manager. So that's sort of my background. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go down the road and let each of these three gentlemen introduce themselves, and then we'll get started. So, Austin, I want to turn over to you.
Thank you very much. And I think I got the chocolate chips out of my teeth. I highly recommend them. They're still warm cookies. My name's Austin Ewell. I am a second-generation water attorney, though I'm a recovering attorney. And I have, in that career, have been able to focus on water resources, regulatory matters, environmental matters, as well as land use. Oh, thank you, Jeff.
Yeah.
Gosh, glad you're here. And through that, that's led me into previous service in the Trump administration. I served as the Deputy Assistant Secretary at the Department of the Interior. I was the policy lead for water in the United States and was able to oversee the Bureau of Reclamation. As Chase had mentioned, the Bureau of Reclamation, for those that aren't aware, operates and controls the Central Valley Project here in California, which runs water from Shasta all the way down through Tejon. And in that role, we're able to focus on a number of matters in California and made significant progress. And during that time, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, a few executive orders that the president was able to issue during that first term, which has led into some actions that he's taken in the first few months in this administration. I also serve as the executive director to the Water Blueprint for the San Joaquin Valley, which is a coalition of communities, academia, agricultural groups, commodity groups, environmental organizations, disadvantaged community organizations that have come together and looking at common sense solutions for the valley as a whole. As I'm sure you're all aware, historically it's been tough to get water interests, let alone those types of stakeholders, to come together. I think it really highlights, unfortunately, the crisis and the water scarcity that we find ourselves in, but it is because of the significance and the emergency of it. It's really brought folks together to try to work on solutions. We've made some significant progress. We'll talk about that a bit as well. And actually, the great pleasure of having Jeff next to me serve as the vice chair on the Water Blueprint for the San Joaquin Valley. And so with that, I'll turn it over, especially since you helped me with my mic.
Yeah, well, hello, everyone. I'm Jeff Vanden Heuvel. I was a dairy farmer in Chino in Southern California for 39 years. The Chino Basin, which was kind of the center of the dairy industry in California for a lot of years, is in a confined water basin area, and that water basin was adjudicated in the 1970s, and a lot of cities are there, and so there is an interesting interface between agriculture and urban, and I served representing agriculture on the Chino Basin Water Master Board for 20 years, from 1998 until 2018, when urbanization took the dairy that I was on. Fortunately, I didn't own the real estate. I was leasing it from the county of San Bernardino, and they decided that FedEx made a better offer than I could, renting it for dairy. And so there's now a big truck distribution center sitting on that property. My kids didn't want a dairy. They were grown up and doing other things. But I had a couple of them that lived in Visalia and Tulare, and grandkids. And so I moved up there and sold. My wife and I decided to sell our cows. And this is in 2018, and SGMA, Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, had been passed in late 2014, and was just starting to get going. The dairy industry is pretty large in California, although it's spread out. Unlike Chino, where it was, in about a 10 square mile area, we had 400,000 cows. Up here, it's spread from south of Bakersfield all the way up to Stockton, in basins that had been designated as critically overdrafted. And so I'd been on the board of Milk Producers Council, which is a dairy farmer trade association that was founded in 1949, a long history of advocacy and representing producers. And I'd been on that board, and I'm retiring from milking cows, but still got hopefully some productivity left in me. And the board of milk producers asked me to be kind of the dairy industry's eyes and ears and advocate as SGMA is. And so what I did was identified where we had dairies, what GSAs they were, and started going to meetings. That was the only way to figure out what was happening. And I created, I've kind of had a unique perspective, because I had good knowledge about groundwater adjudication. I'd also been involved in the Southern California Water Coalition, which is the 8 Southern California counties, urban, ag, cities, business, labor, that advocates for water. Southern California would not exist were it not for these major water supply infrastructure projects that make Southern California possible. So they've always had their eye on that, and I'd been on the board of the Southern California Water Coalition since the early 1990s. So I had a rather interesting perspective already, and now being exposed to the challenges of the valley, and so we'll get into that a little bit as we go. But my job to this day is to be the dairy industry's eyes and ears and advocate.
Great. My name is Steve Jackson, and a little background. I come from a multi-generational farming family as well, and so I spent about 25 years farming on the west side of King County in a district called Dudley Ridge, and got involved at very early on in joined the Kern Water Bank. Yeah, that was and we can talk about that later, but then because of there was a few people going to water district meetings, I started attending. The next thing I know, they asked me to be part of the water district. So I served on that board, Dudley Ridge board, for over 20 years. Met a number of people, some very large farmers, some of the largest farmers in the state were in that area. Made great relationships, and ended up parlaying that, working for another large grower. Then sold some property off. We were able to do some policy. And I just found I really enjoyed the board work, what was going on, the politics in water. I sensed there was just not that many people really engaged. And so I was thankful I had a mentor at Wonderful, a gentleman, Bill Fillmore, who really kind of mentored me over the years and really challenged me to step up. And so I was then I got a chance to work with a very large grower too, and ran his water portfolio. So it put me onto numerous boards, and I was working on JSA board work since the beginning, 2015, 2016. So I kind of bring a perspective of what's going on and how how you cook, how the books are cooked, or how you want to figure out how to develop a plan. I think what people don't realize is how little we had to go on when we were developing these plans. And it was I think still a miracle that we got these plans passed. However, regrettably, we had a number of them that didn't pass muster. So then the last, I would just fast forward to today. The last few years, actually, I worked with Chase and Brad for a little while, but then the last few years, I've been on my own. I have my own water consulting business. Work with growers, primarily, I would say the San Joaquin River south down to Bakersfield area. And we're just working through, and I still actually serve on one GSA board. And so I kind of bring a more, I would say more of a board perspective, kind of looking at what's going on behind the scenes, and also advocating for growers and trying to bring policy that's going to help stabilize water supplies for us. But also, I think we'll all get into this, but part of this, I think, is a recognition that there is going to be major changes in the valley. And I think that's part of what I think each one of us will probably speak to that, is how we're helping growers navigate those changes, how best to make decisions now. Regrettably, probably some of these decisions should have been made a few years ago, but not everybody had enough foresight to see how quickly SGMA was going to be implemented and how fast these policies were going to be put in place. So anyway, that's just a quick background of my kind of my experience and what I've been doing here recently.
Well, thank you. Thanks to the three of you. Jeff, why don't we start with you? With the folks that you represent, give us a little idea of where you think you've made some incremental progress on some of the issues that you're representing them on.
Well, when I started showing up at these GSA meetings, and folks surprised to see anybody showing up at meetings, because water meetings are not very, as Steve mentioned, it's remarkable how little people pay attention to these water meetings. But the dairy industry is concentrated. I mean, there's dairy up here in Merced, and there's a big chunk of dairy in the South San Joaquin Valley, Larry, and it's really dry there. I mean, if you look at Merced Irrigation District's Lake McClure, it's over 1 million acre feet. You look at the Lower Tule and the Pixley Irrigation District's local water supply, it's Lake Success. It's 85,000. And the watershed of the Tule River and the watershed of the Merced River, in terms of the amount of land, are about the same, 400,000 acres. So it doesn't really take a lot of connections to realize that area is just really, really short of water. So, they built the Friant, and so they bring some water in there. But, why did dairy go there? Well, dairy needed pretty big chunks of ground. And you look at some of these northern areas that had more, better water supply, were developed earlier. There was a lot of, very successful other agriculture operations going on. So the land was available. Dairy didn't, we could turn bad land into decent land. We got a lot of fertilizer that we could put to good use that way, but we didn't have a lot of water. So I would show up, and there's been a lot of academic, not a lot, but there's been a number of things that people who aren't part of agriculture, hadn't really looked closely at it, say 30,000 feet down, they go, well, water transfers, that'll solve the problem. And so when I would show up representing dairy, they'd say, oh, hey, we think dairy's going to take the worst of SGMA. And, I'm just trying to figure this out. So I'm just listening. But what was that assumption based on? That assumption was based on the fact that the field level value of pistachios and almonds generates a whole lot more profit per acre than corn and alfalfa and winter forage. So in a competition for water, how are you guys going to compete? I mean, basically, the message was. The reality is, though, that, those trees need water every year. And this, at least in the South Valley, they just don't have water every year. And so if you don't have an assured supply, and really that area is been most aggressive in putting allocations in. Why? Because they're under the greatest constraint. And so they put allocations in most of those areas 4 or 5 years ago already, and they're starting to bite. And, I love the tree guys, but it's a really tough thing if you got a native supply of 4 inches of water, and the best you can ever hope for in terms of a surface supply, if you're in a district that's got surface, is maybe 1 acre foot. You just can't sustain that. But you know what you can do if you take the trees out? You can grow a winter forage crop. And you know who can eat a winter forage crop? Dairy cows. So, I don't, we got to learn how to dairy differently. But I will say dairy's got a lot of flexibility, and the cow is an amazing animal. I dairied in Chino. Last area I was on was, a little bit larger, but I dairied on 15, 20 acre places. We didn't grow anything. We imported all our feed, exported all our manure. We ran a milk factory. Hay came from 200 miles away. The corn came out of the Midwest on rail cars. And then we fed a lot of almond hulls, cotton seed. I mean, the cow can take all of that, turn it into something. So dairy's got, and I didn't grow anything, right? So there is a model of dairying that isn't dependent on being able to grow feed in the immediate area. Now, it's been a huge advantage to the dairy industry in California and in the Central Valley to have feed available. So the point is, we got to do things differently and very, very adaptable. We've been through lots and lots of cost price squeezes over the last 30 years. So the survivors in the dairy industry are pretty tough and pretty flexible. We got a problem with what to do with the nutrients. That's probably the biggest problem, because one of the major reasons, we always grow crops for feed, but it's also a way to utilize the manures. And that's a problem, but it's a problem we already had, and we're working hard at trying to find solutions. So, it's a tough deal. You ask about the people that I directly represent and work for, it's a tough deal. But I don't think we've lost hope.
Yep. That's great. And I'll sort of follow up on that with you, Steve. You're both a farmer and a water resource professional. And so how do you maintain a positive outlook as we have these obstacles out in front of us, whether it be commodity prices, input costs, et cetera? What do you see out there that sort of keeps you on a positive, outlook?
Well, I'd say, first of all, my faith. I think farming is a profession that I've been involved. Probably a couple. I would say at least 4 or 5 generations. So I think family ties. I think you really have to love what you're doing. I was telling, I think, a gentleman earlier, I love farming. It's something that you just do. It's in your blood. So I think that's why I would say, first of all, that and I've been through cycles. I've been involved with my dad through the 70s and 80s. We went through a very difficult time. So I think you just realize you have to pace yourself. I think in the water world, farmers I know, and myself included, we like to have immediate answers and things solved right away. This isn't going to be solved right away. And I think that's a frustration that I deal with myself. And also, growing, I grow almonds by Visalia in an area that is a wide area. However, the orchard is by a stream. So we do have a small amount of riparian water that we can access. So we've gone through, I call it the stages of grief. And I've talked to other growers. You realize that you can't sustain what we thought we could do. So we're just having to, like in our operation, we're having to adapt. We're going to have to resize what we're doing and rethink how we're going to use the ground. I think the challenge I deal with growers is one, we're trying to figure out what we can do. And so I think one of the things we do, I've always done myself too, is we just never stop looking. We keep turning over, looking for other options. Can we do this? Can we do that? Can we ask people? We go to meetings, as Jeff mentioned. We go to meetings, we ask questions, and you try to navigate and develop policies that are going to give growers the most flexibility possible, because that's what we need. We're going to need flexibility to adapt, and this is a painful process. I don't know how many of you are in the areas that are probably more constrained, like Jeff was saying down south. but we're talking a large amount of ground that's going to go out of production. And that's not an easy process. And I don't think, well, I can't speak for what the state regulators are thinking, but I can only imagine that they got to know this is going to be a very difficult thing for us locally to deal with. And I've been in meetings, very emotional meetings. People are passionate about this lifestyle, which I totally am behind. You know, I don't want to lose these multi-generational farms too. And so it's a challenge. I just keep going forward, I think, Chase, and you just never stop. I've had some difficult farming times in my life, and I remember thinking about the fact that I always would tell myself, hey, don't stop. You just keep going, you keep turning over the shovel, you keep driving, you keep moving. And I found those who quit, give up, well, yeah, it's over. But if you just keep pressing, you know, I believe that there's going to be some positive outcomes. They may not be what you think they are today. So I'm hopeful that we as a group and as boards look at these issues, I'm hoping that we can have more creative options for growers as we transition through this period. So anyway, that's just a few thoughts on that.
Well, thank you for that. Austin, based on where you grew up in the Valley and your background, I want to focus a little bit about the time you spent back in D.C. And with the new federal administration being in office now for a few months, where do you see potential there can be some beneficial aspects of programs or policies or the ability to put some leverage on the state of California that you see in the next 3 or 4 years that could provide some positive outlook to the growers in our area?
Yeah, thank you, Chase. And to both Steve and Jeff, really identifying, what is happening and what we're really seeing by, our friends and neighbors within the San Joaquin Valley. And as Steve mentioned, you're looking at the Water Blueprint. It engaged Dr. David Sunding at UC Berkeley, who had put together an economic impact assessment, identifying about 20% of the overall 5 million acres of agricultural land in the San Joaquin Valley coming out of production with the full implementation of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. Now that's significant. And I think what you've seen in this current president and his former time serving as president, a keen and focused awareness of the importance of agriculture and of water in California. And you've seen that through even the campaign, and you saw that even in the first few days of him being sworn in. One of the very few initial executive orders that the president issued, Executive Order 14181, included a priority and a directive on water in California. And that is very unique. And I'd look to probably Steve and Jeff and even Chase. I don't know if we've had a president as involved and as aware of California water maybe since Kennedy, which just happened to coincide with the timing of the projects, the Bureau of Reclamation projects coming online. And so the president's providing tools. This executive order is one of them. And in previous action, so the current executive order that's in place also references the previous actions, which I'd mentioned kind of in the opening remarks that the president also had issued. And I can tell you as a former federal employee, those are useful because they provide guidance and a constant directive of what to do. And as you would imagine, the government is massive. And a lot of these can get lost, these priorities, these initiatives. But when you have something as an overarching guidance, especially through an executive order, it provides the opportunity, especially for political appointees, to carry through on that directive. Now, one of the areas that the Water Blueprint is focusing in on, great, excellent directive, goals to accomplish within the executive order, and some tools to be able to work from. But you also have to have the personnel there to be able to work on those items. And as you know, it is a big country. The Bureau of Reclamation, for instance, it has the responsibility over the 17 western states, including Hawaii and Alaska. And there are massive projects within those reclamation states, one of them being the Colorado River. And California has a significant tie to the Colorado, the largest contract rights holder on the Colorado. And the Colorado has updated guidelines and an expiration that's coming up in 2026. And so that'll be a significant focus of the new administration because of the 7 basin states that make up the Colorado. But it's important for us in California to continue to be able to work with the new administration, work with the state administration, and I'll give acknowledgement and credit to Governor Newsom, who it also issued his own executive order, providing also some a path and some guidance also on water priorities and delivering water and diverting water. And it is a unique opportunity for us as stakeholders, the Water Blueprint and others, to be able to work collaboratively with our fellow stakeholders, as well as the state administration and the federal administration, because at present, the president and the governor have given us some tools to do that. And it's important for us as stakeholders to identify what are those priorities and work with our elected, again, on both sides of the aisle, because they recognize the importance of water, and provide what those solutions are and work towards them. And I think we stand at a very unique time, again, not only due to just the emergency and the critical nature that both Jeff and Steve had talked about, but also this willingness of stakeholders to try to work together to solve it, not just for themselves, but also for their neighbors. And so I think this federal administration is giving us those tools, and it's imperative on us to make sure that they use them.
Oh, great. Hey, well, what I see a lot is farmers have a hard time getting in the room with other farmers and getting on the same page, and for a variety of reasons. And sometimes it's Valley farmers not being able to engage with Delta farmers, or Northern California farmers having issues getting on the same page with Central Valley farmers. And there's other coalitions, and there's Farm Bureau and a lot of that. But I want to direct this question to you, Jeff. One thing that I really saw in some of my growers that are funding it is that this blueprint really had some vision that if we could get it put together, could lead us down a path that may be able to help. And my view of the blueprint is not only you had growers from different areas in the room, but you also had a diversity of other folks in the room. And what I hear from my farmers that are help paying for it is the blueprint gains a lot of steam, then it quiets down, then it gains a little bit more steam, and then you don't hear about it. And without getting into the weeds of the blueprint, how are we doing as an ag community within that, within the blueprint itself and the people sitting around the boardroom of moving this thing forward?
Context is everything, okay? And so my context was I'm a Southern California guy. That's where I had a career. And as I mentioned to you, Southern California wouldn't exist if it weren't for imported water. And when you look in the valley, what parts of the valley are organized around water? They're the parts of the valley that got organized to bring surface water in, right? Westlands, Bryant, Delta Mendota, Set Irrigation District. Well, what about everybody else? I mean, they just put wells in. They really didn't have a reason to be organized. When everyone who is in the professional water space is accountable to a board of directors, and their job is to take care of Westlands, Bryant, or whatever, then that's what they do. And one of the things that hit me when I came into the valley was, okay, let me just contrast. Southern California has a lot of water agencies, and by necessity, they have to work together because they all need this system to work. So they are very organized. They have Metropolitan Water District. Everybody loves to hate them. It is a top-notch, professional, capable organization, and has been for decades.
Inception.
Yes. Okay. We didn't have anything similar in the valley. The dairy industry pretty much stayed out of water issues. We got involved in issues when they were threats to us. So when the water quality regulations began to start to bite, we got organized to defend ourselves and become proactive as an industry on water quality stuff. formed Dairy Cares. Same with the air stuff. When the air board started, putting a lot of restrictions on it. Water supply, our water supply in the San Joaquin Valley is very diverse, and the groundwater was never regulated. But one of the things that, and I'm not alone in this, but that hit me was, the water, the people who, when the rest of the world looks at the San Joaquin Valley, and I'm talking politically, who do they think represents the valley? Well, government's run by people who show up. So who shows up? Westland shows up. Bryant shows up. And these other water agencies. But there's a lot of people that didn't show up, had no reason to show up. Sigma changed all that. And then the commodity groups, we needed to start getting involved. Okay, this was too important. And what that does is by bringing the dairy industry, the citrus industry, and these other commodity groups into the conversation, suddenly, we're interested in results, and not just results for Westlands or Friant, but results that help our whole industry, which basically covers the valley. And then the towns are starting to realize, hey, the counties, when Dr. Sunding, when that report came out, it was billions of dollars. It was hundreds of millions of dollars of reduced tax revenue. And these counties, none of these counties are really all that wealthy in the San Joaquin Valley, and they start looking at their tax base. And so it took some leadership, and I will always give Jason Phillips from Bryant because, he had a district to run. He had a board that was holding him accountable for how Bryant was doing, but he saw that we as a valley needed to get organized, east, west, north, south, and then bring in all of the stakeholders that had a stake in it, which is basically everybody. And so he got his board to support him investing some time and energy and bringing some people in, and he really started to initiate what ultimately became the blueprint. Now, blueprint is it's a coalition of the willing. It's who shows up, and Austin was willing and we were happy to have Austin as long as he didn't charge us anything. So he hasn't charged us anything.
I'm a volunteer.
He continues to be our executive director. But, volunteers can take you a long ways. But, eventually you have to form up into a institution. And that takes money, and it takes time, and you got to build these relationships. So what may look from the outside, it's not like the blueprint has a huge budget and can afford to be out there and everybody, out there everywhere. It's a group of volunteers. And it's not like it's the first time, and particularly when commodity prices get tough, folks look for places to save money. And, when you're looking at which bills to pay, this bill, and I literally can't buy fertilizer, or I can't buy seed, or I can't pay employees, or this bill, which may hurt me down the line. So, money's always an issue. But I will say the blueprint has continued to mature. It's spun off a couple of other very, very important initiatives. The one I'll mention is the Delta Delta San Joaquin Valley Farmer to Farmer, which was really birthed under the auspices of the blueprint, and it identified 7 farmers from the San Joaquin Valley, a very diverse group of farmers, and 7 farmers from the Delta region. And Austin and I have been advisors to that group, so I've had a chance to learn and get to know a lot more about the Delta. I didn't realize that, the Delta has a north, a central, and a south. They have very different issues. And so we had a good group of farmers from the Delta and the San Joaquin Valley, and we've been getting to know each other, and they decided actually to form their own group to work just exclusively on issues, and they're called the Great Valley Farm Water Partnership. They've identified some initiatives that would be good for the Delta and good for the San Joaquin Valley, and the first one is dredging. So we've got some communication going on. It's not directly related to the blueprint, although I think it will be soon. You've got a budding partnership between the fishing interest, and started in the Sac Valley. and now it's starting to incorporate the San Joaquin Valley ag interest as well. Turns out that, fishermen, and, that was Paul Souza, was a federal head of the Fish and Wildlife, maybe still is. He spent a good part of his career in Florida. Then he got transferred out to California, and I remember talking to him a couple of years ago. He was baffled. He said, in Florida, the fishermen and the farmers, you guys all wear extra tough boots. Culturally, you have all this in common, and yet in Florida, we work together, and in California, you're on opposite sides fighting each other. Well, why is that? And so there's been some real progress. So, I would say, I'm thinking about Steve, and of course, being in the dairy business for 39 years, I had my share of really tough times. The dairy industry is real cyclical like the rest of ag. And, my basic thesis is you don't solve problems so much as you outlast them. You just keep working it. And I think that's the way this whole water thing. We keep working it. Not everything's going to work. We need to have a lot of grace and patience with each other and be encouraging to each other. Sure. It's always easy to throw rocks at the guys up front and say, how come you're not moving farther, faster? You have more success. But sometimes a pat on the back, and we really appreciate that you're out there fighting, might help a little bit more.
Yeah, and I'm glad to hear that. I talked to Jeff about those meetings they're putting together with the Delta farmers. I was involved in something similar around 10 years ago, and because both farming groups sort of got busy, it started fizzling, but we learned a lot. We met quarterly for 3 years, and we learned a lot about how we could work together, and so I'm glad that that's going on. And you're absolutely right. If you look at a lot of water districts and their closed session items from a legal perspective, a lot of the folks that are suing ag and going back and forth are the fishery agencies. And Jeff's absolutely right. Farmers like to stand up and puff out their chest that they're multi-generational. I've been doing it for 3 or 4 generations. They're absolutely right. My parents farm. But if you go and talk to the fishermen, they're 3rd or 4th generation too. They're trying to do the exact same thing. We from ag have done a terrible job, in my opinion, trying to work together with the fishery folks. I'm hoping we're learning something as we're putting this together with the Delta farmers. So, Austin, maybe on the same tent, do you have anything to add from your perspective with the blueprint and how we're sort of holding together with this diverse group trying to push forward?
Yeah, and to Jeff's point, when you find these initiatives, especially this common ground, and that really was the goal of the Farmer to Farmer, for instance, just to use that as an example. And when they all sat together in a room, they realized there was a tremendous amount of commonality. And a lot of that is the passion for what they do, the generational aspect of what they do, wanting to carry that into the next generation. And it identified, for instance, dredging, which is now a particular item that they, as that coalition, are going to pursue funding to assist with silt removal throughout the Delta. And it's interesting because as you learn about it, and that's going to be one of the exercises that's really challenging, and they've recognized it is hard to, really, spread the message about silt removal and get people excited about it. But when you are able to go through, distill it down, and what will end up meaning not only for the Delta interest, but ultimately the South Valley interest, it's significant. And it's something that, yes, the magnitude of the cost is rather large, but not nearly in comparison to what it would cost to try to move additional water through or build brand new facilities. And so though it kind of builds on its own momentum, another coalition of sorts that the Blueprint had helped kick off, which is also known as the San Joaquin Valley Collaborative Action Program. And that's done an excellent job of also getting environmental interests to the table and a number of disadvantaged community advocate groups, because, again, historically, those groups have been on opposite sides. And we're seeing that there is commonality. There's a big interest, especially by the environmental groups, to see proper funding for the multiple purpose land repurposing. Excuse me, the
multi-benefit.
Multi-benefit. Thank you. Land repurposing bill. That's the problem with acronyms now. They're everywhere. Yeah. I actually remember when I first started at the federal government, you're sitting in the room and they just rattle off acronym after acronym, and I finally I grabbed somebody. I was like, do you guys have like a cheat sheet, like a Cliff Note version of all these? And so a few hours later, they come in with a phone book size. And what's this? These are all the federal acronyms. I was like, no, okay, that's the problem. But so that is the land repurposing. The state has supported that with funding. We've seen its implementation and use in areas of the state, and it has been helpful. That's another tool. As we see, there's not one single tool that's going to solve this problem, but where you now have environmental organizations, agricultural interest, water agency interest, county and municipal interest, identifying these solutions and then pursuing them together, we're seeing some progress. But as you know, this is a monumental task. And there are those times where we're making some progress, and there's some times where we're not making as much progress. But as we're all well aware, there is no standing still. There's only going backwards or forward.
Right. And I think where we get ourselves into a box sometimes as policymakers in the boardroom is we always get into this trap of talking about limited resources. And I think we actually have to focus on the abundance of resources, because we do have an abundance of resources, but we get into the trap. We go through 1 or 2 years of drought, or we have something come out of Sacramento that sort of gets us refocused. And man, we have very little to work with, because then we're not ready for those years where we get 2 or 3 wet years in a row and we're not putting every acre foot to use, whether it's storage, above ground, below ground, and a variety of other things. So from that aspect, Steve, looking at this abundance of resources, even though we have a diversity of supply, whether it's groundwater, surface water, whether it's the diversity of water rights, and the diversity of water rights, I think, is what limits us a lot too, on what we can or can't do. What are some programs or projects out there, Steve, that maybe these folks don't know about that are showing some progress that may get built or may get done here in the next few years that sort of keep your growers in the South Valley sort of moving forward?
Well, on a big note, I would say, looking at the off-stream storage projects, I mean, they're super expensive. I know sites is moving forward slowly. San Luis Reservoir raise, that's expensive. I think those participants debated that, but I think for the most part, everybody's participating on that. So that's helpful. I think, Chase, too, what gets us hopeful in the South Valley, though, is some of the work that Blueprint's doing, some of these ideas out of the box, conveyance ideas, because we need to find ways to get water to areas that really don't have it, or get more water off these streams in the conveyance systems so that we can recharge it. I think we're realizing in the South Valley that it's really been next to impossible to see any new storage built. So we're focused on recharging groundwater, recharging water when it's available. So that I think that's a key for us. So and then some of the regulations statewide too, I think we have to enable. I know the governor's executive orders, EOs, the last few years have been helpful to help get more water in the ground. But I was actually there at the formation of the Kern Water Bank, and that to me was an amazing project. Those who are not familiar with it, it's on the Kern Fan. It's out by close to I-5, 20,000 acre, about 7,000 acres of recharge. So that model, and then those around it, the Rosedale Rio Bravo, the Pioneer Project, there's a number of water banks that in Kern County has really helped that basin to help equalize its supply. So I think that model works. It's going to help us. It's just one piece. And I'm just going to divert real quick, Chase, to another thing that Austin and Jeff spoke to. But I think it's important that we as water people reach out and try to get collaboration. Too often I see everybody in their own silos. They really don't want to, and I get it. You're tasked to take care of your district and your growers. But I had a conversation with a water district this week, and we had so many common sense ideas, and every one of them was shot down. So I understand where he's coming from, but we thought we had some common sense ideas. And so I think that's probably a frustration that we deal with on a local grower level sometimes, is how can we how can we come up with solutions that are going to help, save maybe another 10 to 50,000 acres of irrigated ground if we could work together, recharge water when it's available, collaboratively. And then also, I think conveyance is a big issue. I know that the blueprints worked on that. I think conveyance for us is really got to be looked at through the Delta and then down here in the South Valley too, how to rethink and re-strategize. And the last thing I'll just say too, to Jeff's point, I think working with the disadvantaged communities, I think we've had a few conversations, and I think we need to recognize those who work on our farms. We need to be really figuring out, not be turning a deaf ear to the issues that we deal with our communities around us. Water quality and water quality has been a huge deal a lot of places, and I think also dry wells has been a big deal. So I know that's kind of a hot button topic for a lot of us, but I think we need to really balance that as well. And I appreciate the Blueprints efforts in that regard to take a holistic approach to this very difficult situation we face here in the South.
And I'll just follow that up for you folks out there that are in the financing world. There are a lot of projects out there that are ready to go in terms of getting built. We're trying to look for creative financing because of the ratepayer. The ultimate ratepayer is going to be the farmers and the dairymen, and trying to find some interest rates, some payback terms that work. But just some of my own clients, I mean, we got $50 million of projects that we want to build in the next 12 to 48 months. And we're out there talking to institutions, trying to find out the most creative way to get them financed, let alone what the Bureau of Reclamation and some other big water districts have for the raising a BF6 dam outside Los Banos, Sites Reservoir, et cetera. So, Don, I think you maybe had a question? Yes. Yeah. Go ahead.
And I apologize, I had to step outside. First off, I'd like to say thank you. I don't always go to meetings where I'm learning something new, especially from the guys that I see 3 or 4 times a month anyway. This is really very well done. I appreciate you. And before I get to my question, I just want to say, I have tried for years to get contact and a conversation with the Pacific Federation of Fishermen Alliances. And that is it may not sound like much, it's moving the ball hugely. I used to do the Delta for years. I was up there at South Delta, Central Delta, getting that going. I mean, that 2 things right there give me hope. There are 2 things that are bothering me, and I want to see if you all have some ideas of how to adjust. First off, what I don't hear much talked about is the NGOs. I see the NGOs as a major problem. Those are non-governmental organizations. I could name names. I don't know if that'd be appropriate or not. I see a head shaking.
We don't need to. We know what you're talking about. Yeah.
I think we all know. But I would like to see if there's anybody thinking about what to do to combat some of, because they're putting things backwards. The other thing, we did not get a California native in for the commissioner at the Bureau. And I think others do too, we need to establish maybe a California czar for the USBR. And is anybody putting into thought? I have no idea how you do that. I'd love to help, but are these on you guys' minds?
Why don't we take it in reverse order? You want to jump in
Sure.
about the commissioner and maybe
Yes.
for those folks who don't know, sort of what went on last week?
Happy to. So for those, as we'd mentioned, the Bureau of Reclamation, established in the early 1900s, its mission was for reclaiming and building out the arid West, which it had done in a very successful manner, including Hoover Dam, Grand Coulee, Glen Canyon, Shasta, and others. It is its responsible party, which is held by a political, appointed by the president, like most departments and agencies throughout the U.S. That's run by a commissioner. That's the title that position has. On Monday of this week, the committee, which is responsible out of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, announced that the White House has put forward a gentleman's name, Ted Cook, out of Arizona. And Ted had worked on, for about 20 years, I believe, at the Central Arizona Project. And Ted now will take over, assuming he's confirmed at some point in the future, will take over the Bureau of Reclamation. Don had brought up there had been some hope that a Californian may would take that role and especially be able to focus on California water and priorities in California. I still have hope and optimism that you will see some appointments, maybe even in the near future, that happen to be Californians. And to your point, as kind of a czar, there is precedent in previous administrations that happen to actually not be Republican, that individual, a political, had been tapped to oversee priorities, water priorities for California. And so there is that precedent that's in place, and I think a number of water stakeholders and contractors want to work with the Department of the Interior, the Secretary of Interior, and Reclamation, and the Commissioner of Reclamation to identify, an individual that may be able to help carry through those priorities. As I mentioned before, especially having the guidance by the President of identifying water being a priority, identifying California and water being a priority, be able to have an individual that could carry through with that. And so I'm optimistic that can occur, but that won't happen on its own. It's going to take continual outreach by Western stakeholders, California stakeholders, and doing so in a collaborative manner in order to get someone in that role to fulfill. Because as you're aware, the Colorado is going to take a tremendous amount of time and energy and effort by the administration because it has a ticking clock and it has to be addressed by the end of 2026. So it's going to be up to us in California to make sure that we're heard, they're aware, and we again are providing the solutions. We can't look to them to answer the problems for us. We need to provide solutions to them to act on.
Yeah, if I could,
Sure.
if I got a moment, I'll give you my view on NGOs. But I do think that there was a huge paradigm shift. Sigma changed. It was a massive game changer. And if you think about it, we developed the San Joaquin Valley, California agriculture, with no groundwater regulation. So there were areas that...
and I'll note, California was the last state in the Western United States for comprehensive groundwater management.
Good. Yeah, that's right. I mean, we probably should have regulated it 50 years ago, but we didn't. Okay, so we developed, this unbelievable agriculture powerhouse, and really, I'd say world-class place called the San Joaquin. Grow 250 to 300 different types of crops, and we did it all without groundwater regulation. The state comes in and for very good reasons decides to regulate groundwater. They do it over a long period of time. But if you think about it, farmers, when floodwaters come, when we have those wet years and groundwater's not regulated, for the most part, we let that water go because it was going to damage our crop. It was a nuisance. It was a problem. And Sigma changed that. Now we look at that as a vital piece of our future. And so, like overnight, and then in 23, we saw, without a lot of planning, what we were capable of. And it's astounding what we're capable of. What's also astounding to me is that the state of California could do this massive paradigm shift and go regulate groundwater and put a pittance to financing this massive change. We don't farm for our benefit, right? I mean, I got a friend of mine a city kid, a guy from Long Beach that I was talking to on my way up. He's 94 years old, wonderful guy. And he had just read a story in the LA Times. Well, he hadn't read the story. He'd seen the mayors who from big cities that depend on the Colorado are getting organized. He said, well, what's that all about? So I explained it to him. And I said, there's people that don't think alfalfa is worth growing. I said, look, Nate, I said, who uses that alfalfa? The farmer who grows it or the dairy farmer who buys it and puts it in the cow? The cow produces a gallon of milk that goes to the creamery. They turn it into an ice cream cone, and mom buys it for Susie at Thrifty, an ice cream cone. Now, who is the guy responsible for that ice cream cone? Because without that bale of alfalfa, there's no ice cream cone. Okay? And the lack of appreciation by the state for the impact they were doing to agriculture with Sigma is astounding to me. So I think the blueprint's very necessary to continue, and all of us, to continue to bring the message to the state that they need to invest. And what do they need to invest in? It's on us to tell them what they need to invest in. We need more conveyance. But the fact of the matter is all of the surface water that regularly occurs has got somebody's name on it already. Okay, all these streams are. So you got some flood flows, and we will grab those, and we need some help in financing the conveyance to most efficiently bring them in. And but the other, you got to remember in the drought of 90-91, we all got a big wake up call. Southern California got a big wake up call, and they did something about it, and we didn't. We did build the Kern Water Bank. That was good, but we didn't. We just turned to groundwater. We started overdrafting big. Southern California built a lot of water reclamation projects. They've invested billions and billions, and they built storage, but they have a space of real estate problem. They can only hold so much water in Southern California. But they have basically, remember, the State Water Project has a yield at 100% of over 4 million acre feet a year. Metropolitan has the rights, they've paid for these, to 2 million acre feet, so half the State Water Project. As soon as the State Water Project allocates over 30%, so this year it's 50%, because of all of the water conservation and water reclamation and everything that Southern California has done, at 30%, they pretty much are in balance. So in 23, when we had 100% state project year, they left 400,000 acre feet that they could have brought in on the table because they had no place to put it. That's an opportunity for us. We've got partnerships. Metropolitan also changed their policy. For decades, they had a policy that they couldn't sell their water outside their service area. They have changed that so they can potentially become a seller to us of their surplus water, and we can become a storer of their water. They always thought about needing to be able to sustain a 3-year drought, but I think more realistically, we got to be thinking about a 5-year, 6-year drought. So they have a need to squirrel more water away. They have squirreled away a lot, but they're a great potential partner. They have the finance, they have the money to help us. So I think we got potential partners, and I think the state of California has a whole lot more investing to do in the valley. It's on us to make that case. And then I think the federal government also sees a real value to the nation of having a successful San Joaquin. So I think the pieces are out there. It's on us. And, we've been telling you, we're starting to get these organizations going. And to the extent that you can support, all of us can support a little bit, we can make good things happen.
Any other questions out there? Yes, sir, in the back.
A few years back, didn't the voters approve a water storage initiative? Whatever happened to that?
Yeah, so the question was, didn't a few years back, the state of California approve initiatives for water storage, et cetera? Austin, you want to take a run at it? We probably don't have the same answer.
Excellent question. And the only reason that Jeff and I were giggling is that not much.
Yeah.
Austin was giggling.
I was giggling.
I'm crying.
And I'll let Jeff run with it a bit too. You had significant dollars committed through the proposition for water storage projects. Very few of those dollars have actually been utilized for water storage. We have really one, which was about $500 million. You have another in Kern Fan, as you had heard Steve mention earlier, and Jeff. The Kern Fan groundwater storage project, which is a project that had also received funding. But as far as the surface water storage projects, there has been no real movement or tangible results to that. There are dollars committed, but far behind in what the voters had reviewed and approved has not come to fruition.
Yeah, here's the reason. The reason was there was an interpretation that those dollars could only be spent for the public benefit of these storage projects. What's public benefit? Getting water to farmers is not a public benefit. Okay? Well, so you take, I think a lot of the people in the valley voted for it because they thought Temperance Flat, which would be another storage reservoir up above Millerton. And the Bureau of Reclamation was developing the Fryant project. I mean, you know, this country didn't always have an unlimited line of credit like we apparently have today. And so they actually had to try to finance stuff. And the Temperance Flat Lake would have been a little bit higher up the San Joaquin River, a little bit more expensive to build. So they built Millerton first, right above Fresno. But it's a relatively small lake. I mean, the San Joaquin River in a wet year generates 4 million acre feet, and that lake is 500,000. And it has flood control responsibility because there's a whole bunch of people downstream that need to be protected. So it was undersized from the get-go. It's a very hard-working lake, and the idea was, you know, eventually maybe we can build another lake. And I've been on my boat and gone upstream, and there, I mean, it's a beautiful bowl, a narrow opening. It make for a very nice reservoir up there. But when they did the calculations, it was like, what? You'll correct me if I'm wrong, but it was like a billion, 1.1 billion or 2 billion. But they could only come up with about 100 million of it. That was that met the definition of
178, I think.
Okay, that met their definition of public benefit, which left water users to have to pick up the rest of the tab. And there's just no way to finance it, you know. And you know, frankly, I mean, we'll see if Sites gets built, but you know, you try to parse out these benefits. You've got a very integrated water system, and if you just really think about it, all these different lakes and dams and rivers and everything, they all work together. And like we saw in 2025, we had huge storms.
2020.
No, I'm talking about this year. Huge
Okay.
storms that hit north of Sacramento and nothing south of Sacramento. Well, it creates this massive distortion. You got Oroville and Shasta, which are up there. They're spilling, but there's not any water in the south coming up from the San Joaquin River. And because of regulations in the Delta, you had literally weeks where you had 150,000 cubic feet per second. It's a massive amount of water. That's 300,000 acre feet a day going through the Delta coming down the Sacramento River, and only 1,000 or 1,100 CFS coming up from the San Joaquin. And so they had the pumps, there's a ratio that has to be maintained according to the regulations. Pumps were shut off. And it's asinine. Okay, so now getting to the NGO. You know, the American people, you know, we go through these ebbs and flows. We've been through a crazy time. I mean, think about where we were 5 years ago, right? We're going into COVID. We had the George Floyd tragedy. We had riots in the streets. And now where are we today? Okay. I mean, that's a big mood change. Okay. We had Silicon Valley that from the 90s until about 2015 made gajillions of dollars. Guys started stuff in their garages and became multi-billionaires. And you know what? They were still human beings. And with it came a certain sense that they needed to do something positive for the population. And they invested a lot in NGOs who claimed to go represent poor people, claimed to represent all these different things. So these groups were very well funded, and they came in, and we see them all over the place, and they create all kinds of havoc. But, you know, Silicon Valley hasn't done as well. The attitude of the country is changing. You know, they run on money just like everything else. I think their money supply is probably starting to become stressed, and who knows how reasonable they might get if they don't have a big, deep wallet backing them up.
I'll give a shout out though real quick. There are numerous, I'll say moderate NGOs that have come to the table that are working in organizations like the Collaborative Action Program and others. And a big credit to them because I think they're looking for common sense solutions. I think they're being pragmatic. And what you're seeing is that's causing attention to those more extreme organizations. And that's because there are these NGOs they're willing to sit down and are looking for real solutions and to work together on it. And the nice thing about by doing that, that's quieting some of the more extreme positions.
Is there any more questions? Because if not, to stay on time, I'm just going to ask each of our panelists to give us one out-of-the-box idea that they have, or one out-of-the-box perspective or opinion that may sort of move us forward, looking at it a little bit different. And maybe it will gain some footholds in the near future, or maybe it's going to take multiple years. But is there anything that you have that's sort of out there a little bit that you're willing to throw out that may be something tangible that we can grasp onto? And Steve, why don't we start with you down the end, and we'll move this way as we wrap things up.
This is kind of little out of the box. Jeff mentioned the last drought we had in the early 90s. My dad and I bought some ground with water for $750 an acre. And I'll never forget that. I thought I'll never see that again in my life. But I'm thinking we are going to hit a time where ground is going to go very, very cheap. And I think people need to think out of the box what we can do with this ground and find ways to beyond solar. I think habitat, we got to come up with ways. Land is not going to go away. The valley is going to look vastly different. So I think we need to think out of the box as what can we do with this ground, because the values of ground in certain areas are dropping tremendously. So I think those who have some ideas, I've been thinking a lot about it. We're beyond the multi-purpose. Some of these programs just really don't have any money, but I think there's some people who have money that if you put some thoughts behind it, I think that's going to be some opportunity. So, where there's chaos, there's always opportunity. So I'm eternally optimistic that the farmer base here in California is not going away. We're going to continue to farm going forward. It's just going to look different. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks. Jeff?
I was never any good at essay questions. Give me multiple choice.
B.
I think you got a pretty good flavor of where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
Well, I'll touch on a little, and we talked about it, and it kind of maybe try to put it together a little bit. But what we're seeing, and the story that Jeff had just talked about, perfect example in 2023 and what Metropolitan was faced with. It has then led those urban agencies, and Metropolitan being one of them, to then come to the valley and look at opportunities of storing water. And I think we're all aware, well, if you're not, the San Joaquin Valley has a massive, massive aquifer that has significant storage space. And what occurred in 23 and the current kind of mindset, it's allowing these discussions by these urban organizations to partner with agricultural interest, water agencies, and landowners to bring in water in excess so that it can be stored here, an amount of that left behind or acquired even by the San Joaquin Valley. And it creates this partnership between the Central Valley and Southern California that we have really not had. And I'm sure you're aware of the population that's in Southern California. Well, with that population comes the corresponding number of elected. And we in the Central Valley do not have that type of population, and we don't have the same amount of elected. But when we're aligned and working with them and in concert, we've seen awareness by the state, awareness by the legislature, awareness by the governor, and then actions thereof. And I am very optimistic moving forward about these partnerships with agriculture. And I'll say we're doing the same with Northern California as well, Valley Water and others, which is Santa Clara. But that is where our strength in partnerships is where I think we're going to succeed.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I'll finish it up with this, is we've done a really good job in this state since the 30s and 40s moving water north to south on a parallel, to 99 on a parallel to I-5. We haven't finished it up as it relates to how we move water, east and west. And just to give you a perspective, the Central Valley Project this year, south of the Delta, is going to finish up at a 55% allocation. All right. So, that averages out somewhere maybe a foot for most CVP districts, a foot of surface water supply. And they all go out and do their homework. But at a 55% allocation, based on the numbers we're looking at now, we're going to be fat to the tune of a couple 100,000 acre feet come the end of February. It's water that those Central Valley collectively won't be able to put to beneficial use. All right. They've had to go out on the open market and buy supplemental water supplies because the Bureau of Reclamation dribbled this water out, from March all the way to June, and farmers have already put their, stuff in the greenhouse. At a 55%, they're going to be fat of water. And based on the limited amount of storage we have in Valley, we're getting better because we can put some in the ground. Based on the limited amount of relationships we have with Santa Clara Valley Water District or Metropolitan in terms of moving our water over the hill and getting it back in a future year, that's water that we're probably just going to lose. It's going to get recolored behind Shasta or recolored somewhere else and go into 2026 water supply. So I think we got to do a lot better job, because some of that water, if we really want to make it work and we could repurpose the place of use of it, there's no reason that water shouldn't be staying in the valley, even to help irrigate white area lands that are 100% groundwater. And we just haven't done a very good job of that. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of opportunity out there, but we got to be able to make those opportunities work while still keeping the farmers and the dairymen in business. It's got to be, you got to be able to afford it. So thanks to these three gentlemen. You guys all have their contact numbers and stuff. They're very open. They're three great experts that you guys can rely on. And why don't we give them a big hand for today? Appreciate it. Thank you very much.